The Arrogant History of White Ben, Chapter 16, What Can Parliament Do? Only on one evening in 2 years can the English dine late and happily out of doors. It was such an evening. The months of heat had so dried up the earth and air of the valley that coolness passed along the terrace like a river god with an armful of rushes, young, singing a tune. The night was late in coming, the skies, gradations from gold to amber, green, lilac, and violet were so slight that though the wind quieted and the stars came out, and Illico, halfway through dinner, slipped neatly away to turn on amusing floodlights, there was no moment at which anyone could look up and say, "Night is here." No one, that is, save Ben. He knew. No messenger of the night escaped his eye. Bright with greeting and joyful recognition, he saw the first bat. He lifted his eyes from the dancing bubbles in his glass of champagne to watch the midges dancing between him and the evening star. Through the general conversation he heard an owl hoot, then the scream of a vixen, and the last rustle go over the cedar before it slept. He smelt the coming dew, and wondered that Jenny Oleron drew her animal skins about her, and loved his Lady Pont because she did no such thing. Indeed, Ben was a happy scarecrow and knew it, knew that he had the best of both worlds. He had so longed to become that which he appeared to the crow's simple eyes, a man who could move about and talk, and be accepted by other men as one of themselves, and behold, he was accepted. There he sat at their magnificent table. The table was as round as a morning glory, brown as a ripe horse chestnut, with white circles dotted about it like so many discs of mayweed. On it there were glasses full of colored water, with midges dancing in them, and trails of leaves that were wirier than bryony, and of a sicklier green. There were dishes of foods colored like flowers scorched in a bonfire, and from them rose little clouds which smelt more delicious than campion or bacon. These foods were put before him, and when Lady Pont took a spoon, he took a spoon, and when she took a pronged fork, he took a pronged fork. Old George had no such fork, and he tasted and swallowed with delight. But he did not taste often, because he liked the wine better than the food. It laughed in his head. Even more than the wine he liked, adored, worshipped his companions. He did not need the wine to tell him how wise and wonderful they were. He wished that the woman of his hilltop could be here to see how his hostess smiled at him, lifting her glass, how the fair-colored sisters stared and giggled and whispered also. None of these creatures could rival his fretful mistress, with her lean grace, her neck, her long waist, and her lazy eyelids. But he wished she were alive and sitting there to see his triumph. She would have said to that bitch Jenny. What would she have said to Jenny about him? His spirit sank. This, then, was the true sting of much-reported death. When your triumph came, you never knew what the dead would have said to you. When the triumph came, you never knew what the dead would have said to it or to you. It spoiled the sweetness of triumph. For oh, it was triumph to sit among men and women, one of them, to listen to their human talk, to understand some of it, to be liked by old Lady Pont, yet all the while to hear, see, and smell, as they could not, the coming of night. As he thought this, smiling again and thanking God that he was not as other humans, he found himself staring into eyes like his own, black, blank, two coals in a grate. He believed for a moment that he was once more caught by the mirror. He was beginning to be wary of mirrors, and realized that the flying man, Latimer, was looking at him intently. At that he began to turn to study Latimer, and was instantly struck by the likeness of the flesh, but not of the spirit. Except for his eyes, the man was a handsomer Petal. But Ben knew at once that he could never trample upon him as he trampled upon Petal, and yet Ben was sure of this. The man felt, or could feel toward him, much as Petal felt. He could be a friend, a lover. "Then he will always love me," whatever I do to him, concluded Ben. And this I think he knows, because he looks at me with too much courage, as if he would tell me that at any rate his hands are much stronger than mine, and that he could break me in pieces. Why not? I am only wood. Nevertheless, I am not afraid of him, and he is afraid of me. That is as it should be, thought Ben, withdrawing his eyes, and instinctively drinking in a deep breath of night air. But it was humanized, and gave him no refreshment. He continued to stare at Latimer, and another thought came to him. This Latimer, argued Ben, is a flying man. He could fly above the roosts. So he shall, and watch the rookeries for me. He shall follow the hordes, chase them, fly with his iron wings athwart their flights, make a mash of them, plow them up, like the spring plow tearing up weeds and old roots. They will drop to earth 1,000 in one field, and we shall make a bonfire of them, as the Queen did in Ireland, till flesh and feathers stink. He emptied his glass. Then, in his head, the wine laughed again, and he looked once more full at Latimer. He would even have spoken, had he not been suddenly aware that he was watched by Jenny Oleron, who was sitting opposite between Latimer and Edgar Sweet. She did not once look at him. Leaning forward, one plump elbow on the table and her full bosom touching it, she was engaging her host and Lady Pont in conversation. She was recounting an adventure on the London-New York night plane. Lady Pont was in fits of laughter, and Edgar Swaite was smiling primly and throwing in comments which set Lady Pont off again. Nevertheless, Ben knew with absolute certainty that Jenny was aware of the silent exchange between him and Latimer, also that she would have stopped it if she could. Her anger shot across the table at him like the sudden blade of light from the prism of the finger bowl with which her hand was fiddling. It was a definite message, not of words but feeling. He recognized it as his own savage sensation. Whenever he saw a crow, she was hating him at sight exactly as he hated a crow at night. He was so startled by this hostility that he looked across at Latimer for help. Latimer received his look, smiled in amity, shrugged, then turned away to engage in resolute conversation with Persephone. But not before Jenny Oleron had noted the second exchange, and again her message stabbed across the table at Ben. You are vile. If I could get at you, I would destroy you. Keep out of my way. But when he looked at her, there was only her blonde profile to be seen, and she was still making Lady Pont laugh. But Edgar, who sat between the two women, was listening to the general conversation, and Ben followed his lead. For though much seemed to him in a foreign language, it also seemed to be a continuation of the talk under the apple tree 24 hours earlier. They were all cross-questioning Bothering about some people whom everyone at the table knew well, but not so well as Bothering. How will France take it? Japan is furious, after the way Italy treated Spain. Ah, well, Germany and Denmark are cousins, you see. Ben got the clearest picture of a family group and family rows, and plumed himself on his personal independence. There were other scarecrows, yes, but they were no relations of his. He caught Latimer's eye and said, Are there always such quarrels in a family? Latimer stared, thought quickly, caught his meaning, and said, So they tell me. Why have you no father and mother? Cried Ben, much interested. No, said Latimer, with equal directness, for Ben's simplicity attracted him. Nor have I, said Ben, delighted. But tell me, he leaned over the table. They are not really people, France, Germany, Japan. They are whole flocks, surely. Then why talk of them in... He groped for a phrase. In the singular, said Latimer, helping him. That is what I mean. He nodded at Bothering. He said just now, Germany always loses her temper. Why talk like that when she is not a woman, when she is millions of people? It misled me. I will not be misled. He should speak clearly so that I understand. Ah, get rid of the diplomats, Edgar nodded to Ben. The middlemen, added Lady Pont, smiling at him. But we need middlemen, insisted Bothering. Someone to see the buyer's side and the seller's side. That's why the best diplomats are businessmen, self-made men like me. Self-made? Said Ben, and caught his breath. Had Bothering made himself? Then he was greater than Ben. Ben had only been made. Quietly he got up, carried his chair round the table, and planted it between Angela and Bothering, who, amused at this intent interest, turned to include him. I'm saying, Mr. Campion, said Bothering, and waved away Trelawney and the strawberry ice, that whether it is writing a play, or painting a picture, or running a newspaper, or a country, when a man takes 10 years to do a piece of work, and then all the other men take 10 minutes to tell him just how they can do it better, at Washington the governments grabbed what they thought, and the men behind the governments, they too grabbed and bargained. But you cannot get blood from a stone. There are no victors, there are only the vanquished. And cessation is the peace. Make the most of it. And he bit off the end of his cigar and spat it from him. Do you mean to say, demanded Angela, that there'll be no indemnities? Aren't we going to get anything back? In any country, madam. It is a world paralysis. But what are we going to do? Be a little less prosperous? Ah, said Jenny with relish. Your servants won't play tonight's trick on you this time next year, Angela. They'll be working 16 hours a day for you merely to be kept. I see, Angela looked relieved. But surely Parliament will do something, said Lady Pont cheerfully. Oh, ask our MP about Parliament, Bothering retired, grinning into the perfume of his brandy. Yes, said Thetis brightly to her brother. Why doesn't Parliament? I do enjoy, Edgar cut through her mutterings, the women voters' why doesn't Parliament attitude. You should see my touching postcards. My dear Thetis, we aren't governed by Parliament. We're governed by financiers like Bothering. They've loaned us peace, and we shall pay interest for it, shan't we, Bothering? Do you realize that since the sirens sounded, there are 6 European armies out of work? Who's going to provide employment? The taxpayer? He's laid the egg, and we've made our omelette out of it. If there's any nourishment in the shell, what in God's name can Parliament do? What can any of us do? What would you do? And he rounded suddenly on Ben, who opened his mouth at the sudden attack. Come on, tell us, said Latimer, smiling at him. I shall do my work, said Ben mildly, brushing aside the straw locks, as he looked from one to the other. What is your work, Mr. Campion? Stuck in Jenny silkily. I've been wondering. He looked at her. His eyes glowed. I scare crows, said Ben. And that is the end of chapter 16.